I wish there was some way I could convey the horror I felt as I lay in bed with my own kids, surrounded by my own pets, and listened to the sound of heavy men's footsteps downstairs walking from one end of the house to the other all night. Whoever it was, or whatever, was wearing hard-soled boots. At least, that's what they sounded like. I found myself wishing that he'd take them off. Mike kept saying, "Mom, can you hear that? Aren't you scared?" And I remember saying, "As long as they don't start up the stairs, Mike, don't pay attention." An excerpt from the book Echoes of a Haunting by Clara M. Miller, better known throughout this story as Clara Dandy. Hello there, friends, and welcome to the Paranatural Podcast. My name is Ben.
And I'm Glorp Knob.
And we are so glad to have you with us tonight as we take a look at the spooky and strange happenings of one of New York's most haunted and creepy locations, the Hinsdale House.
You mean to tell me that it might be more terrifying than Amityville?
Well, since this story's probably real, then yeah, sure do.
All right, I'm actually not Glorp Knob. I'm Jake.
He is Jake. He is Jake, my buddy, my partner. How you doing tonight, buddy?
Oh, I'm fantastic, Benjamin. How are you?
Well, I'm doing pretty good. Pretty good.
Pretty good.
Now, before we jump into our episode tonight, I do have to give credit where credit is due. This episode was actually suggested to me by one of our listeners, Rebecca, and I would just like to say thank you, Rebecca, for suggesting this. I was not aware of it until she brought it up. And let me just say that this one actually threw me a couple curveballs, and that is very exciting. So we do appreciate that. And if you have a suggestion for a show, hit us up through email, paranaturalpodcast@gmail.com, or on our Facebook group, and whatever you got, we'll gladly take a look at it.
I also got to fulfill a promise to probably our very first listener, Ryan Rose. Thank you. I know you'll be listening to this. Otherwise, I'll come back to Michigan and kick your ass. And also my coworker who has been listening a shit ton lately, Adonis. Thank you. Fuentes. That's what his last name is.
Yeah, we certainly do appreciate the support, guys. So
yeah. Yep. Very much so. Appreciate you guys.
All right, buddy. Anything else before we dive into this thing?
No, you got me. You got me hooked on that intro. I'm excited.
All right then. So I guess we're gonna start at the start. There is, as in most good haunted house stories, some we'll say legends that surround the property. Okay. The first legend is, and if you look up the story, you'll see this, was a massacre of Iroquois that occurred in the Hinsdale area. Now, I'm simultaneously going to say that that is very, very possible, and that the most oft-repeated legend is absolute bullshit. The one that I read said, I didn't even bother to write this all down because it was just such bullshit, but it said that it was some Iroquois tribes that went against another Iroquois tribe, and it mentioned the 7 tribes of the Iroquois Confederacy. There was only ever 6. Okay, so we'll start there. The second one was, again, I didn't write this down, but in that particular telling, they wrote a letter to one of the founding fathers of our country, the one I can't remember.
John Wayne.
The time that they said that this happened, he was not even in the United States yet. So, that being said, though, the early days of our country and before were wild times. So, you can't exactly say that there wasn't some sort of battle that happened there. Okay? It was also a very populated area by Native American tribes and fur trappers and all kinds of people. So the second legend that they tell was that the house itself used to be a pub that sat along the stagecoach route, and that the brothers who owned the pub would rob and murder people that stopped at their inn. And what they would do would be to, like, you know, rob them and then take them across the road and hang them from a tree. And then if it was wintertime, they would store the bodies in the basement until the ground thawed enough for them to bury them. That's one of the legends.
You got bad juju on your hands already.
You know, if any of that's true, yeah, you kind of do. Another one of the oft-repeated legends is that on the property there was a 16-year-old boy who was fatally struck and killed by a buzzsaw while he was working. So those
Fatally
are just
struck.
fatally struck. I don't know exactly what that means, but that's the legend.
I mean, I've heard of angry dads throwing tools, so maybe there's something like that. It happens.
I feel like this is probably more a story of some sort of work accident, you know.
Okay. I
What
just
have
wish
you.
they would have used a different name. Struck. Fatally struck.
Fatally struck. What
I
else
was
would you,
expecting a car.
what else would you call it when it hits him and he dies?
A buzzsaw?
That is the definition of fatally struck.
No. Usually you survive.
Not if it takes your damn head clean off.
You sew it back on. Throw some spit in there.
Super glue it.
Yeah. That's what they made super glue for.
Now, those are the legends that kind of rest in the background of the story. Where the real story starts is actually with the Dandy family. So, Phil and Clara Dandy lived in Buffalo, New York. And their marriage had been strained for quite some time. Well, at one
Yankee Doodle.
right. At one point in the late 60s, they took a vacation up to the mountains to a cabin and kind of reconnected there, and, you know, things felt a little better. So they decided that maybe it was their life in the city that was causing a lot of tension in their marriage. So they went looking for a house in the country. And eventually that led them to an old kind of fixer-upper house in the small town of Hinsdale, New York, which is north of Buffalo. So they moved in there. Phil and Clara took their 4 kids and moved to this house. Yes, Jacob.
Thanks. Does it say what year?
1970 was the year they moved into the house.
Okay. Okay, I
So-
just gotta know if I'm thinking like Native American times or what.
No. This was 1970.
Okay.
So, you know, pre-cell phone, but, you know.
Right. Okay. I get you.
Now, the Dandies took their 4 kids, who were Mike, who was 17 in 1970, Beth, who was 16, Laura, who was 12, and Mary, who was 11.
I can tell you why they have problems with their marriage.
They were Catholic.
It's 4 kids.
Yeah, they were Catholic. Well, Clara was Catholic, grew up Catholic. Phil converted,
To what?
but to Catholicism.
What was he?
I don't know.
Pentecostal, I bet.
But that being said, Clara always claimed that, like, she felt like true Catholic, you know, religion did not quite stick with Phil. So, but yeah, they had 4 kids.
Okay.
Now the house, the Hinsdale House, sat on 8 acres of land
Nice.
and had a freshly dug pond. And by Clara's account, which most of this information comes from Clara's book, echoes of a haunting. So it's all by her account. But by that account, she said it was a very pretty property. The 8 acres led up like a mountainside. It was, very wooded, secluded. It was just what they were looking for. But she also went on to say that there were certain features of the house that she found kind of unusual and creepy, which she originally chalked up to just being a city girl.
Yeah.
And if you're like me, kind of country, you'll recognize a few of these features. One of them was that the house did not have like a proper attic. What it had instead was just kind of a crawl space. They just kind of, where the walls went flat and the house did not, there was just a little crawl space storage area in there. The other one, which is really familiar, especially to us Michiganders, is the root cellar, which Clara described as being very short ceilinged. Like there was only one spot in there where a grown person could stand up straight. And the walls were made of rough hewn stone and it had a dirt floor.
That's a Michigan basement.
That is what we call it. We call it a Michigan basement because most of our basements around here, unless you put in a great deal of money, look exactly like that.
That's totally a Michigan basement.
And she was also a little off put by the door, which was in the bathroom and just kind of tucked over. It was a real narrow, short little door. And if you've spent a lot of time, like a lot of my family has old ass farmhouses like that were built 150 years ago that have been remodeled, and sometimes your basement door just kind of winds up in a real weird spot.
Yeah. My friend had one that was in a closet.
Mm-hmm.
I just read a story of they found someone in their basement, but it was in a closet, but it was a hatch door.
Mm-hmm. Yep, you see all kinds of weird stuff that goes on when you remodel these old farmhouses.
Yeah.
Like, that's why some of them wind up with these really tiny, tiny little bathrooms, was because the house was built before indoor plumbing was a common thing. So when they remodeled to have indoor plumbing, they just picked like a literal closet or a pantry off the kitchen and they made it a bathroom. So you see all kinds of weird stuff when houses get remodeled,
And sometimes you get that secret basement. Like you're going down the stairs and there's that secret door.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get all kinds of weird shit. Which to us, like we're used to it, but Clara was from the city, lived in more modern type houses,
It's a slicker.
So now they bought the house in Hinsdale in 1970. And Clara and the kids spent quite a bit of time running back and forth to Buffalo, loading up the family station wagon and bringing stuff to the new house. Well, on their last trip from Buffalo to Hinsdale, as they got near Hinsdale, their pretty much brand new car, it was a 1970 station wagon, just started to randomly overheat.
Radiator.
Now, that doesn't seem like much. On its own, a car that malfunctions is not that much. But as time went on, it seemed like people had a lot of car trouble, whether coming to visit the family or leaving the house or whatever. I got a few more specific stories of it in here, but even today, I was watching YouTube videos on it, and one of the ladies' videos I was watching actually has a segment where she goes to the house in Hinsdale, and her very nice car, when she went to leave the house, wouldn't start.
There's a saying for that in Michigan too. Shit happens.
I mean, yes, but it was frequent enough that it became noticeable.
Yeah.
The other weird thing that happened on the last day of moving was that Clara's mom and brother had decided to help them move out the last of their stuff. And they had packed up their vehicle first and went off ahead of Clara and the kids. And they got to the house first. Well, when Clara got there, and she had been to the house previously, but when she got there on the very last day of them moving all of their things out of Buffalo, the house was covered in bees, honeybees.
Oh,
Absolutely covered. To the point where Clara's brother said that when he got there, he had to push through a wall of bees in order to get inside and call an exterminator. Because remember, this is before cell phones, so he had landlines. He had to go inside.
Should have used his pager.
Clara also said that the bees were so thick on the outside of the house that you could not see through the windows. It was like they were covered in a black curtain.
That's terrifying.
So Clara did something at this point, which I was not aware you could do. She called a bee expert. A local bee expert. I was not aware that you could just flip open the yellow pages and find a local bee expert.
Like relocate the queen kind of expert.
I don't know what kind of expert he was, but she called a bee expert. And she told him what was going on. Oh, by the way, for our younger listeners, if you don't know what the yellow pages or a landline are,
I forgot about that.
Please ask your mom and dad.
Yeah.
Anyway, I know we're old. We know what these things are. You might not.
I used to play that old game in the yellow pages where you look for the certain clues that send you to a different page.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, she called a bee expert and explained to him kind of what was going on because it seemed real weird to her. And he said, yeah, that's real fucking weird. Bees, number one, don't swarm like that kind of ever. But they certainly didn't swarm together at that time of year. Anyway, the exterminator showed up, and he pretty much said the same thing the bee expert did, which was, holy shit, this is weird. And then went around doing what exterminators do, and he sprayed all the bees and killed them. And apparently there were so many of them that once they were all dead, Clara describes the cleanup as shoveling heaps of bees and filling garbage bags.
Yuck.
Now, that should have ended it, but it didn't. And for quite some time after this, Clara describes that there were so many bees around and they were still in the house to the extent that honey would drip from the ceiling.
Free snacks.
I kind of see this as a good, bad thing. Yeah, like number one, that is kind of a sticky mess. But at the same time, all you got to do is stand in the right spot with your biscuit.
Yeah.
And
hold it right under
it just, gravity takes care of the rest.
Don't even need KFC no more.
Now, eventually, the bee and honey problem did come to an end, and Clara chalked it up to the queen just moving on for more hospitable places, because they did keep trying to get rid of the bees throughout this.
I could imagine, like, hey, all our people keep dying. Let's find somewhere else.
Right. Eventually they'll move on. Now, the family, on top of having 4 kids, also had a whole bunch of pets.
Yo, boy.
Like a whole bunch.
Was one a talking mongoose?
They had no talking mongoose. That would have made this story like Paranatural Bingo. What they did have, though, when they moved in, were 2 dogs, a pet raccoon, 4 guinea pigs, 2 parakeets, 2 finches, a pet woodchuck, and shortly after moving in, someone gave them a kitten.
A pet woodchuck?
I wasn't aware woodchucks could be pets.
I was hardly aware that a raccoon could be a pet, but...
I mean, at least I've heard of that before, but I've never heard of a pet woodchuck.
Yeah, no kidding.
So apparently Clara's real name was not Dandy, but Doolittle.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that would explain the bees too.
Now, shortly after moving in, Clara's dogs started bringing home bones. This happens in the country if you let your dogs run free, which they did. They let the dogs outside. They ran around the property. However, these were not like the normal bones that a dog will bring home, which would be like, from a woodchuck or a raccoon or a rabbit or something.
Right.
These bones were like large bones.
Mammoth.
It could be. I don't think they were that big. Now, to be fair, these very well could have been deer bones. There's deer hunting is big up there. There's a lot of deer up there. If they found a dead deer, they could have drug home the bones. Whatever. That is not the implication of her telling, but, just to be on the side of fair, it could have been. The bones Clara would take from the dogs and discard, so we never really could figure out what they were. Now, Clara and Phil both continued to work in Buffalo, which was like a 150-mile round trip. And Clara got home from work one night, and some of the older kids had made dinner. So she calls her daughter Mary in for dinner. Mary gets back to the house, and she is crying and just running blood off of her face. And what had happened was that she had been riding her bike, and when her mother called, she came back to the house. She hit a rock. She split her chin. She got 6 stitches for her trouble. Now, that on its own is not that bad. Kids wreck bikes, kids get hurt. But the way Clara describes it is that like her family all of a sudden after moving into the house in Hinsdale became the clumsiest people on the planet. There was all kinds of just stupid accidents that happened.
Just a streak of bad luck.
Yeah, like one of the other girls was also riding her bike and she biffed it and cut her ankle and wound up with a staph infection. And the older girl, Beth, broke her ankle in gym class. And the one winter, Phil was pushing the car out of the snow and cut his thumb down to the bone.
Damn it, Phil.
In the first week that they lived there, Clara's mom took a header down the stairs. Like, just all these things happen, like, in very quick succession. With all this going on, Clara decided that she did not want to make these long drives to Buffalo anymore. She wanted to stay home, be a housewife, raise kids, what have you. And at one point after this, Clara is at home doing housework when she hears gunshots come from the woods near the property. Shortly after this, the phone rings, and it is her neighbor calling because someone was shooting at the kids. His included. His kids and the Dandy kids were friends. And they'd been up playing in the fields in the woods, and someone was shooting at them. The neighbor also informs Clara of something she didn't know being new to the area, which was that there was like a very quote unquote eccentric guy that lived somewhere in the area. So Clara calls the cops, and the cop says to her that maybe someone mistook the kids for woodchucks. Yeah.
What kind of drugs do you have to be on?
Pretty
what
good
the
ones.
hell?
Clara's reply to this particular officer was, quote, "I don't know about your children, but mine do not look like woodchucks," end
Thank
quote.
you, Clara.
So, yeah.
Dear God.
I mean, I'll give Clara some credit. She's kind of ballsy. She's kind of a ballsy broad, really. Shortly after this, the same neighbor boys that had been shot at while playing in the field were hanging out at the Dandy House.
Oh, boy.
And they decided to share a local ghost story. And they started talking about a ghost man that could be seen quite frequently walking up and down the road. Right? Now, Claire, of course, just figures it's a local ghost story. These are kids, whatever. That isn't until Mike, the oldest dandy child, said he was walking down the road with these neighbor boys when they saw a man who seemed to just kind of appear out of nowhere.
And you said he was 17 at the time?
Yes, he was 17 years old at the time. So this is not a little kid.
Right.
This is a grown man, really. So they see this boy just kind of appear out of nowhere. And the local boys tell Mike that that's the ghost. They point him out. They say, that's the ghost. Now to Mike, the man looked like just some farmer. The way he was dressed and what have you. Just Mike thought he was just some farmer out taking a walk. So Mike, in order to prove the boys wrong, kind of ran after the man, right? Wanting to catch up and talk to him and what have you.
You don't do that shit.
But when he got about 6 feet away, the man stepped behind a tree and vanished. Of course, Mike was a little taken aback by this and went home and told his mom about the story, wherein she later recounted it in her book. But Clara still, despite this being her 17-year-old son, just kind of chalked it up to his imagination.
Come on, Clara.
I mean, Now, the neighbors also had a little daughter who would come over and play with the dandy girls. And the little girl's name was Pat. And hearing Mike's story, she told Clara, yeah, I've seen him a lot. I've seen that man a lot. And she referred to him as a black man. Now, Clara asked if the girl meant an African-American man. And the girl said, no, he's all black. So, like a shadow person. Clara did some research. She did not specify where or in what books. Google wasn't a thing back then.
What?
Yeah, I know.
How did you do your homework?
And according to whatever sources it was she read, she learned that seeing an all-black figure meant that you were seeing Satan himself.
I've actually heard that.
I mean, I'm sure people say it.
One of the first black-eyed kid stories I read, it was about someone seeing a shadow figure, but all black, and went to the priest to tell him what he saw and what he experienced, and the priest said, you just saw Satan.
I mean,
pray.
Okay, hot takes here, but if you're talking to a Catholic priest,
everything's Satan.
It's Satan, it's demonic, with rare exception. One of those rare exceptions actually appears in our story today.
Oh boy.
But yeah, for the most part, there are certain religious sects that anything paranormal is satanic, period, dot. Anyway.
It's like the water boy's mom. That's the devil.
It's the devil. Now, after hearing this and looking up and learning what she did, Clara was a little concerned for this little girl's state of mind. Right? But sightings continued. One day, the girls come running inside and tell their mother that they had seen a man watching them play from atop the hill. When Clara asked them what exactly it was they saw, or who, or for some descriptors, or what have you, the girls all told a little bit different story. Now, they all said that they saw a man, but Beth said that what she saw was much like Mike. She saw a farmer, just an old farmer. Pat, once again, said that she saw a black man. So they both saw it, but they saw something different. Soon after this incident, one of the dandy's dogs just disappeared and could not be found.
The dog's out of it.
Now, Clara, having read in the local paper that there had been people in the area shooting stray dogs, just kind of assumed that's what happened to the dog. So whether it's paranormal or that, either way, it still fits into that string of bad luck that they had started experiencing like the minute they moved into the house. Now, eventually, they did get another dog to replace that dog. And just to continue the Dr. Doolittle theme, they also got a pet skunk that was de-stinkified.
I've heard of that one too.
And they also wound up with another cat who, shortly after becoming a member of the Dandy household, died mysteriously in the dryer.
Score. What?
In the dryer.
How do you mysteriously die in the dryer?
That's a good question. That's a very good question.
It's like mysteriously dying in the oven.
I honestly don't think I could on purpose shove one of my cats in the dryer without getting my shit ripped apart, but I guess it could happen.
Oh my goodness.
You know? Now, just on the note of bad luck again, the first winter that they lived in the house, so the winter of 1970, in February, so I guess that'd be 71, the water lines to the house froze completely solid and did not thaw until April.
That happens.
It does happen in northern climates, but it's still kind of it's on that bad luck scope. And what this, the family needing water, they had an old, pump handle well out back, which apparently didn't freeze. I don't know how that didn't freeze, but whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know how those things work. So the water might stay below the frost line. I don't know.
Yeah, if it's deep enough, it wouldn't freeze.
But anyway, they would have to take buckets out and pump water and carry it back into the house. And
it sucks.
That was such a labor intensive thing to do, not only carrying all the water you would need back into the house, but also heating it on the stove, that the family began bathing only once a week.
Stinky.
Yeah, that would not be fun.
I mean, you got teenagers in there, BO. Awesome.
Yeah. Facts. Facts.
The stench would be chewable.
Now, the whole frozen water thing didn't just lead to a bad luck situation. Clara recounts that on one occasion, while she was making the trip from the pump back to the house, she looked up and saw something in the sky. The object was moving fast and made no sound. She stood there watching it and called to her children to come and see it. What she described is a large, round craft with no windows. Jacob, Clara Dandy got UFOs in our ghost story, but
no shit.
That was one of the curveballs that I sure as hell wasn't expecting.
Yeah, I got a few things I can call out about that.
I have been watching horror movies for all my life, and the whole family moves into a new haunted house trope, it's cliche at this point. Which I when it comes to this story, I'm on the fence. Does that mean anything or not? Whatever.
Yeah, apparently we got ghost aliens.
But when I seen the UFO thing, I was like, oh shit, that's weird. That's fucking weird.
Does it specify if she had all of her kids come out to see it?
Well, I didn't see if it specified at that point if all the kids saw it, but all the kids did claim to see this thing or similar things like multiple times throughout time. And they described it as making, like real strange and intricate moves like planes shouldn't make. Like it just make 90-degree turns real fast and do all the things that UFOs are supposed to do. Now, in the book, Clara says that despite everything else that she put in this book, this part, the UFO part, she was actually kind of ashamed to add. Take that for what you will. Now, the flying saucer UFO thing culminated on a night when Clara awoke in her bedroom to find the room flooded in bright light. She wakes up, looks at the whole room is just lit the fuck up. At which point she hears her son, Mike, yelling from downstairs that the whole house was lit up. Okay. Looking around, Clara kind of deduced that the light, because it was coming through like every window, couldn't have been on one side of the house or the other, but had to have been coming from directly above. So kind of like noon sun, coming down, shining. The light stayed for about 10 minutes while the entire family just kind of huddled in the middle of the house in fear. Like, not sure what to do. They didn't want to go outside and look. I would have went outside and looked. I'd have ended up getting Travis Walton, but I would have went outside and looked. But just as rapidly as the light showed up, it disappeared. And as it, stopped shining into the house, Clara did actually go to the window and look out and saw either the same or an extraordinarily similar craft to the one that she had witnessed while carrying water flying away into the night sky. Now, you, my friend, expressed a little doubt about this.
Just kind of like, I guess I'm seeing it how my mom would react to this, because like if I was little and she saw something unexplainable or scary, she would keep that from me, because like, one, she probably wouldn't want to like deal with me asking constant questions, and B, because she doesn't want me to be scared. Like, a parent doesn't want their child to fear anything.
Okay. I'm with you there. But I'm going to counter that by saying, number one, none of these kids were exactly little.
What about...
The youngest was 11 when they moved into the house. And this was like half a year later, so she was almost 12. The others were teenagers.
Just saying. I was afraid of shit until I was like 14.
The other counter that I'll have for that is that the UFO, especially the first time she saw it, wasn't doing anything threatening. It was just flying.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be a whole lot different than like, if you were out with your almost teenage kids and saw like an Apache helicopter coming, and you'd be like, hey kids, check that shit out.
Yeah, but that's something that you actually,
I guess, can recognize. I get that point.
Yeah. Like, I'm just saying, if I saw what I thought to be a UFO floating outside, I wouldn't be like, hey nephew, come here, look at that. Aliens, bitch.
That's a fair point. That is a fair point. I have one final counter.
Son of a bitch.
Ace in the hole. Local papers reported multiple people seeing UFOs on the night that the Dandy house was lit the fuck up. Lots of people in the area saw something that night.
All right. I'm gonna try hard for this one. Would you say that this area is located farmland, like big farmland?
I don't know about big farmland. There's definitely some farmland there.
Okay.
I didn't look at a topographical map or anything like that. But the way it's described is more hilly. It like leads up into the mountains and stuff. It's kind of not far from like Lake Ontario that Buffalo sits along, whatever Great Lake is. Yeah. So that's kind of the area you're looking at. I mean, there are farms there.
Or Erie.
Is it Erie?
Yeah.
Wow. I'm usually good at geography. Not today. So anyway, it sits directly north of Buffalo.
All right. So if there is farmland close by, fresh manure, methane coming from it, you hallucinate. Shit happens. Like that's where magic mushrooms grow from. And also some people will throw a blanket over their head and cow shit and huff it to see funny things.
I've never heard of huffing cow shit.
Are you serious?
But
I'll do an episode on that for you.
But again, another counterpoint.
Oh,
The
God.
Dandies did not live on a farm. The Dandies, like, even surrounding their property was not a farm. There was the mountains and the woods. There was a campground up the mountain a little ways. There were like some hay fields and stuff around, you know. And the first sighting was in the winter.
All right.
Nobody's picking magic mushrooms in the middle of winter.
My counter for that. You said they just got new dogs and stuff. Or a new dog.
Mm-hmm.
Wonder if they eat a lot of Spanish food because that gives you death farts, and our farts also have methane.
So what we've established here is that Jacob has absolutely no real explanation for what happened that day. All right.
That's correct.
Now, despite all of the hardships that had occurred up to this point, the Dandy family didn't let it get to them. They were still pretty much convinced that this was like their dream home and their dream location, and they were goddamn staying. So in the spring, they went ahead and updated the heating and the water systems. They put in new windows and new insulation and all that, which was, you know, kind of a financial burden because at the time, Phil was the only one working. And he, from what I understand, had a pretty good job. I can't remember exactly what it was, but, you know, doing all that is expensive. They also had 4 kids and 8,000 fucking pets to look out for.
Yeah.
Now, because, like I said before, their marriage was already strained. And now there's an added financial burden on it. Clara says Phil started to become even more distant as time went on. To just kind of continue with the what the shit's going on here stuff. 3 of their pets died within a 2-month period. All 3 died of no discernible cause. They were all 3 taken to the vet and, you know, checked out and see what the hell killed them. And to make that worse, they all died in Mary's bedroom. So the vet, being extra helpful, did the autopsy on the pets, and his recommendation was pretty much, hey, don't let your pets go in that room anymore. The other thing that started occurring was that money would just disappear. Now, this was never large amounts of money. It was always smaller amounts of money. But it would disappear from, you know, Clara's purse or, you know, a locked container at one point. And it always seemed to disappear when there was nobody around. Okay. Another real weird thing that happened was that before she had quit working, so we're back in 1970 for a second, Clara had come home from work to her children in the house and just extraordinarily upset, telling their mother that someone had broken into the house. Okay. Now, because they had 3 dogs at that time, Clara was kind of doubtful that anybody could just kind of break into the house unannounced. I'm not sure about all 3. I know at least 1 or 2 of the dogs were like herd dogs. They were like border collies.
Mm-hmm.
And they will bark their asses off,
Oh, yeah.
at strangers or what have you. It's kind of their job. They're, guard dogs, herd dogs. It's what they do. So she was pretty like, look, guys, nobody's breaking into this house. The dogs are going to go fucking crazy. But as she went around the house, she found that her and the girls' clothes had been pulled out of the drawers and out of the closets and just thrown around. But Mike and Phil's clothes were completely untouched.
Just the girls.
Just the girls.
The hell?
She also noted that Mary's record player had been thrown against the wall, and Binky, who was their most protective dog, was found outside. He was inside when they left, and now he's outside.
Shit name for a dog, but that's weird.
Especially the most protective dog.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why he is the most protective
Go
dog.
by like Brutus.
Yeah, I mean, if maybe his name's Binky, feels like he's got something to prove now.
It's like a boy named Sue. For all you Johnny Cash listeners out there.
Again, if you don't know who Johnny Cash is, call your parents.
Don't know who Johnny Cash is, get the hell off this podcast.
Now, as I mentioned before, up in the hills behind the house, there was like a campground back there. Now, the campground had once actually belonged with the house. So the land up there had belonged with the property on the house, but through time and parceling it off to pay taxes and what have you, it was now separate, and they turned it into a campground. In May of 1971, Clara took their dog Lassie, because they're real original at naming dogs, apparently.
Good God.
For a walk up to the campgrounds at around twilight. There was like a little path or whatever that led up the hill to the campgrounds. As they're walking, the dog stopped and perked its ears. Clara stopped too and kind of listened, because obviously the dog's hearing something, but at first she didn't hear anything. Until suddenly, she heard the sound of music coming to her through the trees. The music, she said, sounded like a choir rehearsal. Clara said, quote, "The sing-song chant continued, and I expected to come upon a group of singers at any moment. As we rounded a bend in the road, however, I could no longer hear the music. I signaled Lassie, and we continued our uninterrupted walk. Lassie and I turned to go home as we reached the last cabin on the road. Retracing our steps, we started down the steep hill. As soon as we reached the spot just before the final descent to the road, we heard the singing again. Once again, Lassie stopped and turned her head towards the mountain to the west. The music seemed to be coming from the top of the mountain, situated behind some of the campsites, and the only thing I could associate the style with was Gregorian chant."
Huh?
Yeah.
How can you associate with that?
Well, that's
Gregorian?
That was the kind of music that she knew of that sounded like what she was hearing.
Gregorian.
So,
I don't even know what a Gregorian is.
Oh, you don't know what Gregorian chant is?
I am not quite sure.
Oh, it's if I can find some way to do it, I'll try and drop like an example of it here. It can actually be kind of creepy.
Yeah, I was gonna say like the scary stuff.
It can be.
Yeah, it's like
I
throat
said,
singing.
If I can figure out how to do it,
Oh.
I will drop an example of it in here.
Good.
Now, After this walk, Clara gets home and she's telling her family, like, hey, I was up on the hill and I heard some creepy ass singing, right? Now, Mike just kind of laughed at her, right? Because despite his earlier encounter with the ghost farmer, Mike was still kind of like skeptical of shit.
Yeah.
Like he didn't seem to be experiencing quite as much as some of the others in the house at this point. The girls, however, were quite interested. And the next day, when Clara took her evening walk, they all went with her. So up the hill goes all the daughters and all the dogs and Clara and the neighbor girl, Pat. Right? They all head up the hill. And as they reach the same spot where Clara had heard the music before, the music just started out of nowhere. They could not hear it 1 minute, they could hear it the next. On this, Clara says, quote, as we listened, the singing stopped abruptly, and after a pause of 30 seconds, a single male voice began a monotone prayer. If the singing was eerie, the prayer was worse. Till my dying day, I'll remember the look on Pat's face. She had her pigtails pulled up over her head, I guess to hear better. Her face was as white as a sheet, so that her freckles stood out in bold relief, and her mouth was open. In short, she looked like I felt. My skin was crawling. Needless to say, we lost no time getting home. End quote.
I think I've heard this story before.
You think?
I think so.
Maybe in parts.
So I do have some I know the eerie stuff is gonna question this a bit, but they said there was a campground nearby.
Yes.
Could it be possible that they were holding a like you said it's common for Catholicism to do the Gregorian chanting?
I believe so. I believe that's
Would
kind
it
of where it
be
comes from.
would
I
it
might be
be
wrong about that, but
possible that the campground had that and they were just
I suppose it is possible. However, Clara seems pretty sure there's not like a church or anything up there. And it seemed like from later descriptions and things that she never says it outright, at least as far as I saw. But she was kind of familiar with all the people that had cabins up there. Like they were neighbors. And the 70s it wasn't like now. Now you can live 8 feet away from somebody in their house and not know their name.
right.
But back then it was really common to make friends with and be well acquainted with your neighbors.
Yeah.
And like later on, it's part of a story, but there's a description of some of the people that own one of the cabins up there just kind of stopping by at the Dandy House to use their outside faucet to fill some water bottles and what have you. So they're like friends with
Right.
all the people around. So I kind of assume if there was any sort of Gregorian choir up at the campground, she would probably know about it. That doesn't
Yeah.
make it impossible.
Just improbable.
There's also just weirdos that do weird shit.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's improbable. Which a lot of the stuff you get into in these kind of stories as individual occurrences can kind of be explained away.
Right.
When you take them as a whole, though, that's when it starts to get a little weird. Now, Mike heard this story of the singing and prayer from his mother and his sisters and decided that he wanted to check it out. Right? Because now he's here. He's like, okay, I want to see this for myself. So he invited Bob and Matt, the neighbor boys, to go up the trail with him. Bob said, fuck no. That's not a quote, but Bob did say no because the hills are haunted. He very much was not wanting to mess around with no ghosts. Matt, however, agreed to go up the hill with Mike. But as they went up, Matt tried to chicken out. Like before they got up there, Matt's like, "Hey, man, like, let's give this, let's go back." But Mike talked him into continuing, and up they went. And they continued up the trail until out of nowhere, they heard the scream of a woman. Just one single high-pitched scream that echoed throughout the surrounding hills. Yeah. Yep. Now, skeptical. I'm not sure if in 1970 what kind of critters were running around in those hills up there, but it wouldn't surprise me. Bobcats, wouldn't surprise me. Cougars. I'm sure there are still foxes up there.
Yeah.
They can all make some really creepy, screamy noises.
Right.
What kind of makes me like go, what the fuck, is that it's like the same area where they were hearing Gregorian chanting and weird prayers earlier.
The Gregorian chanters disturbed a mountain lion.
I suppose that's possible. Now, upon hearing the scream, of course, the previously brave and adventurous young men Scooby-Dooed the fuck out of there and hauled ass back home. And when they told their mom and their sisters what had happened, the family pretty much just decided that nobody needed to be going walking up there at night no more.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Now, Clara says in her book that over the years living there, she would from time to time hear other people who, unprovoked by her or the kids or anything, they would talk about mysterious singing that would come from the hills. So most people thought kind of what you were saying earlier, that there was like a church up there kind of hidden.
Yeah.
But Clara said she didn't know of any church in the area up there. So does not mean that there were not some weirdos up there. But now Clara says in the book that sometimes there was just like a bad vibe around the house, and that all the occupants of the house, both human and animal, were susceptible to this just bad feeling. The dogs would growl for no reason. The cats would just hiss and fight. The birds would be restless and fly around their cages and shit. The kids would kind of throw like tantrums, despite being a little too old for tantrums. They would, throw fits. They would start petty arguments with each other, and everybody in the house would have trouble falling asleep on the nights when that bad vibe was around. It happened often enough that Clara gave it a name, and she called these umbrella nights for the darkness that covered the house. Of these, she said, quote, "Any other night, I could walk down the road in pitch darkness with no qualms. On these umbrella nights, the very atmosphere made my flesh crawl." End quote. On one of these umbrella nights, Clara noticed that one of their cats, a cat named Jinx, because they do a better job at naming cats than dogs apparently, had not come home. So she grabbed a flashlight and went out looking for the wayward feline. As she went out into the yard, she said she felt an invisible force stop her in her tracks. A force that kept her from moving forward. Of this, she said, quote, I had read about paranormal forces being able to force a person to a stop, and frankly, I thought it nonsense. I found out how wrong I'd been. Whether it was physically restrained or only mentally, the effect was the same. End quote. Yes. Audio medium.
So, mister, for one, did they even look for the dog when it went missing?
Yes, they did.
Okay.
They went out, called for him. They tried to get him. They just couldn't find him.
Okay. Two, I don't have two.
Oh, okay.
An invisible wall is
Invisible
weird as
wall.
shit.
Invisible wall.
Yeah.
Weird as fuck.
Yeah, I've heard about that too.
Now, after running into the invisible wall, actually, I've heard about it too, and I can't remember the name of it, but there's a Japanese yokai that is supposed to be like a big wall that stops you from going where you want to go. Anyway, after the invisible wall, Clara ran her ass back inside.
Smart move.
And she was in there a little while and began to talk shit to herself about being kind of foolish and, getting scared of nothing and whatever. So she does the classic white people move and goes back outside to look for the cat.
Don't do it.
So she goes back out and she's scanning the yard with a flashlight. And suddenly she sees two eyes glowing back at her from a crabapple tree.
Crapple tree.
A crapple tree. She figured, I probably would, that, hey, look, I found my cat. Right? So she goes over to the tree. But when she gets to the tree, there's no cat to be found. There's no nothing to be found.
Just random floaty eyes.
Just the eyes aren't even there anymore.
Oh my goodness.
The eyes disappeared as she got close.
All right. A little bit of skepticism. Couldn't, certain animals have pads on their feet for stealth.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't it have just gotten away quietly?
I mean, I guess that's possible. I mean, there are a lot of animals in that part of the world that can get up a tree, and that if you hit them with a flashlight, their eyes are going to shine.
Yeah.
Not only, yes, her cat, raccoons,
Definitely.
woodchucks can climb trees.
Possums
can climb trees.
Dogs.
But I've heard most of those things come out of a tree.
Yeah, they're
pretty
loud.
damn noisy. So I'm going to say possible, but not probable.
Squirrels especially.
And the other part that kind of says it didn't just get out of the tree is that when she looked up in the tree and saw, nothing, even the eyes were gone, she kind of got a little scared and started backing away from the tree. And when she got about 8 feet away from the tree, the eyes showed back up.
Son of a bitch.
Now, I can't blame her for thinking at that point that was enough. That was enough dicking around in the dark for a minute. And she went back inside. About a half an hour later, the cat still had not showed up. So she gets her daughter Beth, and they both go outside.
Which is how old at this point?
She's 16 or 17. One of the two. She was the second oldest of the children.
So you're willing to put your child in danger?
Apparently. But she's got more.
What a bitch.
She's got more.
Yeah, you can always grow another child.
It's fine.
Yeah.
So anyway, she gets back.
Girl, Clara.
She says, hey, help me come look for this cat.
By the way, there's some spooky glowy eyeballs that just disappear in the tree.
Now,
pay no mind.
To make your point even worse, she let Beth take the flashlight And because she had neither told her what she had just experienced or anything else, Beth like led the charge out to look for the cat. So
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, Beth, while you're at it, why don't you climb that tree and tell me if something weird happens?
right. Now, of course, as you could probably expect, as Beth reached the spot where Clara had seen the eyes before, Beth stopped dead in her tracks and turned around and told her mother that something wasn't right and that they needed to go back in the house.
Clara's lucky that this happened in the 1970s. Otherwise, I'd have CPS all over her ass.
I mean, right. So, with that, the two turned around and ran back toward the house.
Oh, you never run in the dark. That's when
Now,
the spookies chase you.
as they ran towards the house, they saw the cat
Oh.
come around from the other side of the house.
Oh.
And he apparently very, very badly wanted to get back in the goddamn house. Now, whatever it was that had spooked Beth that night, she didn't say. But on the events as a whole, Beth later wrote a letter from college. And the letter said, quote, "The first time I noticed something strange about the family or the house, it was funny because it was before homecoming in my sophomore year. I came home from a football game and you were doing the dishes. And I walked over to the sink and it was like this wall of hostility. You said you weren't mad, but I felt something was wrong. It was funny because I remembered how you always used to sing when doing the dishes. Mary was uptight that day too. Pat was there that weekend, and she kept waking me up, saying something was breathing down her neck. 2 days after that was the first umbrella night I remember. I don't know why I didn't remember before. I guess maybe I never let myself. I keep trying to shut everything out of my mind, but it really doesn't work. I guess someday I'll tell my kids, and they'll laugh, and suddenly it won't seem so horrible. I think the horror started when I noticed that you seldom sang anymore. Well, now you can send the men in the white coats for me." End quote.
I have a question.
Yes.
So you said in that quote that Pat was there for the weekend. Did her
Yes.
parents get divorced?
No, I think
Just
she just would come over and stay with the Dandies. Like she didn't have any
yeah.
sisters, so she would hang out. Which I'm going to tell you right now, throughout this whole thing, they talk a lot about the Dandy kids' friends staying over and staying the night and shit. I'd be goddamned.
Yeah, no kidding.
If I was one of them kids, I'd be like, nope, y'all come stay at my place, but
Yeah.
we're not staying at the place where stuff breathes down our neck at night, okay? I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
Now, sometime after the night with the cat and the glowing eyes, Clara had to take Beth to the doctor because she had broken her arm in gym class.
Hey.
Another one of those accident things. Mike stayed home with Laura and Mary, and the three of them were in the living room when the dog started barking, alerting them to a visitor on the property. All three of the kids went to the front window to see who was there, and what they saw was a boy of about 16 walking along the property line, which was about 20 feet away from the house. The boy turned and started walking towards the pond and suddenly vanished before their eyes. The boy had disappeared so suddenly that Mike just thought he must have fallen into a hole. So he ran outside to save the stranger, the young man. But upon looking around, he found neither hole nor sign of the boy.
Sinkhole.
Do sinkholes cover themselves up after you fall through? Oh, okay.
They do in the water.
He wasn't in the water. He was just walking towards the water.
Ghost
Yeah.
wall.
Ghost wall. Ghost
Ghost
hole.
Wall abducted him.
Ghost hole got him.
Yeah.
The ghost UFO got him.
Goose too.
Now, not long after this happened, two people from the campground by the names of Grace and Dick
Lovely name.
stopped to fill. That was some 70s names right there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Grace and Dick.
Not Richard, Dick.
They stopped at the Dandy home to use the outside faucet and fill their water bottles. They saw the same boy that Mike and the girls had seen standing outside by the spring house. Now, they just assumed that the boy was one of the Dandy kids' friends, but they said it was odd because he seemed kind of lost and oblivious of his surroundings. And as they were there filling up their bottle, the kid just kind of took off walking towards Grace and Dick's cabin, which was up the hill and across this field, right? So Grace and Dick jumped in their car and drove up to their cabin, which was only like a minute or two drive. And since they were still kind of curious about what this boy that they didn't recognize was doing, Grace went up into the attic of their cabin, which had a window that overlooked the field the boy had walked into. But as she looked out the window, she saw no sign of the boy. Yeah, they didn't see him vanish this time, but he still vanished. Now, both of them said they saw the boy. But again, they describe him slightly differently. Grace swore the boy was wearing jeans, while Dick said the boy was wearing chinos. They're both very adamant about this. Yes.
Chinos?
Like work pants.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Clara noted this disparity in her book. And what she says is, quote, "This was the first time since the encounter with the black man that we realized the description of psychic phenomena often vary if seen at the same time." End quote. Now, this is something that, like, just kind of as an aside here, having looked into a lot of different, paranormal and weird stories and stuff, you actually come across this quite often. Where, like, multiple people will see something that's real similar, but has very different details. It's kind of weird. All right, everybody, just wanted to jump in here real quick and let you know that since this episode went significantly longer than expected, we decided to go ahead and break it up into a two-parter. The second part of this episode should be available in your podcast player whenever you're ready to go listen to it. So I'll see you there. Thanks for listening. Good night.